Get into it. Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, this is a new chair. So you can't say that, I don't keep it entertaining or interesting around here. With this obvious visual gag. It's hilarious, look at this. So yeah, we got production value here now. A bit of mise en scene, as they say. So today we're going to be continuing on a video I made a while back, which kind of took off, which was talking about racism in Australian high schools and pretty much how, because we don't teach any Aboriginal history, we create these environments that proliferate racism, fascism, bigotry and whatnot because there is just there's no knowledge surrounding Indigenous history or how we teach it. And yeah, so I'm going to be continuing on that story. So let's get into it. I started university almost a year ago now, so I'm in my second year. And I'm not going to say which university, but let's just say that it's been like a really good run. And to be honest, the services that I've been kind of being grounded as mob there has been fantastic, and I'm very happy to be there. But I remember what happened was I came out of high school and I didn't learn any history, as I know, this is all I talk about. And I went into university and I was like, fantastic, I can finally go and learn something brilliant. I'm gonna have teachers that are gonna know what they're talking about. Libraries full of books, all surrounding this kind of big question mark in my mind regarding who am I, where do I come from, and what is our true national story here in Australia. So I remember I walked into university first day and Indigenous history was an elective. And so yeah, I walked up, had my little lunchbox, some snakes that my dad packed me so I could, make new friends and whatnot. And I walked into class and it was a pretty tight class. It wasn't a lot of people. And I sat down and my teacher kind of introduced herself and she went out of the class. We all introduced ourselves and I kind of worked out that there'd be 2 Indigenous people in this class of I reckon about maybe 40, and that's not the problem. But I remember so clear the first question someone kind of asked is this guy at the back, just this white fella, just put his hand up, and the first thing he asked, he was just why can't we show dead Aboriginal people on TV? And I was like Jesus, that is such a heated, heavy, loaded question for 9 a.m. in the morning. I haven't even drank my coffee yet. That is so, oh my God, that's intense. And I was calm down, and the teacher kind of answered it. And then the first activity was talking about draw yourself how you think, if you were an Indigenous person, how you would react to colonization. And I remember being ooh, okay, sure. Okay, it's a bit weird, but okay, I'll do it. I'm here now. And then the kind of activity before class finished, the kind of final thing was we went around and we talked about why, or I suppose we theorized why Indigenous people wouldn't like the police. And I remember just being ooh, this is kind of not what I wanted or kind of what I expected from an Indigenous history class. And I remember I left that classroom and I was so upset. I called my friend at the time and I was man, that was really not what I wanted. And I kind of built this up in my head. It was I'm at university now, I can finally learn Indigenous history, brilliant. And what I had to kind of really learn, it took me ages to kind of get around my own head, was that boy that at the start of the class that put his hand up and said, why can't we show, Indigenous people that have passed away on TV? He should have been allowed to ask that question. He should have been allowed to ask that question. And what I think we're doing wrong, in a sense, is the fact that I shouldn't have had to hear that. Bear with me. So, but if we look at languages, for example, so if you wanted to learn Spanish at university, you can kind of put yourself in advanced, in beginner, in intermediate, and you kind of get to delegate where you think you stand. Or I think you can do tests now where they kind of place you in a class. But the fact is, as an Indigenous person, as one of only 2 people in that class that day, I kind of know what I'm talking about. And hear me out, because it's like, people are going to be like, how do you know what you're talking about? Because you've never done the class before, which is true. But obviously my understanding of what it means to be Indigenous, or Indigenous politics, or experiences, stories, whatever, is going to be more just further down the line in terms of like knowledge, than some white person that's like just beginning. The same way in Spanish, if you're just learning to speak it, you'll be put in a really beginner's class. Or if you've kind of been speaking it for years, maybe it's in your native language, you'll be put in an advanced class. And what that does is it means there's no like friction between students. Because I remember I sat in the class and I was so mad at this guy. Like I said, I'm a wimp. I'm too scared to have a go at people. But I wanted to yell at this guy. I wanted to do something because it was so offensive. But the thing is, he should have been allowed to say it, but it shouldn't be at my emotional cost, It's the same way, like, imagine putting a year 11 math student into a class with 3rd graders that are learning basic fractions or basic maths. There's going to be such a, intellectual conflict, because it's like the students that are just beginning this topic, who need to know the basic fundamental stuff, are going to find it really hard to be in class with someone that kind of knows more, and that person, that year 11 student that's in the class, is going to be like, well, this is so boring, or this is so basic, that it almost comes off as I can't even engage in it anymore. And that's how I felt a little bit, It's strange to me that we were all kind of put together into that one class, because I wanted to go in and I was like, I'm ready to talk about like Indigenous people in technology, where's that going to go, or like Indigenous people in feminism, or really big, juicy, theoretical topics, and the people that were coming into that class were learning the fundamental basic shit, and that's okay. That's what we need, because this is the first time I said people weren't learning it in high school, so they had to come to university to learn basic stuff. And good on them. Everyone that went to that class, legends. Like, good on you for even going. But oh man, white people need to know about Indigenous history in university, but it cannot be at Indigenous students' expense, emotional expense, intellectual expense, anything. You know what I mean? And I don't know, I'm almost puffed out now, because I'm like not enraged, I'm just like very passionate. And but yeah, do you understand? Like, I think what we've done as well, from my perspective, is like someone that considers himself an activist, like, most Indigenous people are activists. My fear is that I'm not creating enough spaces for white people to make mistakes. You know what I mean? And if this was, a 3rd grader that walked into class and they got the first question wrong, and you're like, screw you, man, you're the worst. You would never do that, because that'd be ridiculous. But I think what happens is, because we create these environments where people can't make mistakes, like that dude that asked that question about, Indigenous people on TV, is people are like, oh God, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to offend the mob. I don't want to offend Indigenous black people, whatever. And so then don't say anything at all. And what happens is there's like radio silence, and people don't talk about any of this stuff. And that is the single worst thing that you can do, okay? Because it's like, okay, we'll come out of high school, we didn't learn anything, and now in university I'm too scared to learn it, or say the wrong thing, or make a mistake and hurt someone. So I'm not going to say anything at all, and that's that. And then nothing gets done. And then we're just redoing these cycles of ignorance. And we have to allow people to make mistakes while learning Indigenous history, but it cannot be at my expense, Do it like languages. Do it like languages where there's levels to it, All the advanced kids in one class, they can get into the heavy shit, and then the people that learn the fundamentals, like, why are Aboriginal people so good looking? I don't know. I don't know why we're so good looking, okay? I don't know why we're really good dancers. I can't help that. But it's the fundamental stuff, you know what I mean? So I walked out of that class, and long story short, I kind of helped to start the Big Collective Cultures Teach My History campaign. It was like this, big campaign to get Indigenous history taught in high school, where we did this like big panel where we got Indigenous students, including myself and some other really deadly fellas, and we spoke to this big crowd of people about, straight from our mouths as Indigenous students, about what it was like to be Indigenous in high school, full stop. Once I started researching more about all this, I started to understand that there's groups that have been doing this for a long ass time. I've only just wandered into this world. take for example someone like NIAC, so the National Indigenous Youth Education Collective, who are really, really cool. I'm going to put links to them down below. They've been doing this for a very long time, and I think it's almost worth going in and looking at their action plan, which is just like the fundamentals as to how Indigenous students should be treated, which is just so well thought out and researched, and just some great materials. But yeah, so in kind of, I suppose, working with NIAC, we in this big campaign we kind of came down to 3 resolute points that we need to kind of address in our high schools. And I suppose I kind of left universities out of this campaign when we were doing it because that's a whole other topic, y'all. But in high schools, the 3 main things were that schools be held accountable for the mandatory teaching of Indigenous history perspectives across the curriculum. So let's just break down what that means a little bit. So number 1, schools have to be held accountable for teaching it. One of the biggest criticisms I get, I suppose, with all this work is people will be like, yeah, but, you know, my teacher taught me Indigenous history at school, or I did this Indigenous elective in high school, or I learnt this really cool thing about this Aboriginal person once. And that's cool. But the problem with that is you are really in the kind of minority in that sense, because it's coming down to the individual digression of your given teacher at the time. So if you had a teacher that was teaching you Indigenous history in high school, bless. They are a legend, awesome. But it's not actually, mandatory for the school to do that. That came down to your teacher being like, I want to do this. And I don't think it should be up to an individual's digression to teach the true history of our country. I don't think that should be a choice. I think it should be mandatory, obviously. And so, yeah, so that's the first part of that point. And the second one is like teaching Indigenous history and perspectives in all parts of the curriculum. To expand on that point, we want Indigenous histories, and we need Indigenous histories and perspectives taught in every subject in this country. You're literally on Aboriginal land. You are on Aboriginal land. We should be in every subject, Do not just keep us in history class, because what that does is it reaffirms this fact that I was talking about in my previous video, that we're a dying race, or that we once were, or, like the belief that, Indigenous Tasmanians don't exist anymore, that we once were, and now Indigenous people don't exist anymore. So you can keep us in history because it was, whatever. Which isn't true. I'm here, I'm alive, okay? I'm not a sim. I'm alive, and I wanted to be treated as such, Don't just keep us in history, because it locks us in history. It denies our survival story, and it denies modernity, and it denies us seeing us in this kind of modern context. So yeah, but also teach Aboriginal history and perspectives in science. Imagine if you got to learn about Indigenous astronomy in science, or teach about Indigenous, bush medicine in biomedicine or whatnot, and teach Indigenous history in literature, and in every subject, because we are an all-encompassing people. I want to know about me in everything. Okay, I'm obsessed with myself. I'm obsessed with my culture. We're really cool. So I want us in everything. Okay, thank you. In sport, AFL is an Aboriginal game. It's Mongrel was what it was originally called. We're in every subject. So don't just keep us in history locked away. See us alive in every subject. Point number 2 that we kind of came up in the campaign is it must be mandatory for teachers, principals, supporting staff to receive cultural training as part of their annual PD. So pretty much teachers need to be culturally trained. There were so many times at my school where I needed a teacher that was kind of just down with it, that kind of just knew what was going on and kind of had sensitivity towards Indigenous politics, culture, social, political stuff. And I never had that. I had to rely on other Indigenous students at my school, which wasn't the problem. You always did have that, but I wish I had teachers that could be like, actually, you know what, I get this on another level. But Indigenous cultural training isn't really mandatory, and bloody well shot, bye. And then PD pretty much just means personal development. So if you're learning to become a teacher, you have to go through this entire list of standards, and obviously there's a lot of training around it. But the PD is kind of what goes into the training before you become a teacher. And just to quickly note, just because I think it's particularly weird, tell me if you think this is weird or if it's just me, but ATSL, which is the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership, which is kind of comes up with the standards for which teachers learn in this country. So when it comes down to like Indigenous students and looking after us, 1.4 of like the teacher standards is strategies for teaching Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. But the words they actually use is demonstrate broad knowledge and understanding of the impact of culture, you know? Not the like beautifulness of culture or the deadliness or, you know, how important culture is. It's the impact of Indigenous culture on students, which I'm not gonna lie, impact for me connotates as like somewhat of a negative word. So from the get-go, before teachers even begin to learn about how to look after mob, it's kind of connotated that we're a problem opposing a knowledge system. So weird. And then point 3, just quickly, is that schools prioritize Indigenous governance over the teaching of accurate and local histories. So pretty much, like I said, last video, my whole thing was like, all Aboriginal people are different and unique. We're unique. There's over 250 of us today, different tribes, clans, nations. We're all completely different languages, the whole spiel. When you teach Indigenous history, it has to be local history, because if I'm down in Melbourne and I'm learning about mob up in the, you know, NT, it doesn't really apply to me. You know, it's interesting to know. And I love my NT mob, but that's not the local mob's knowledge or histories or culture, you know? We're so complex. And so I want my local history. I always use this example, but, you know, if you put the map of Europe over the map of Australia, you see how big all the tribes are and how many of them are there is, how many of us there are. And you would never ever teach European as like an overarching subject. You would teach Italian, or you would teach Swedish, or you would teach, you know, British history or Norwegian history. You would never just do overarching Europe, because that's so bloody big. Like, how could you ever do that? So we want local histories, y'all. Yes, so I suppose those are my 3 demands. Who am I holding hostage, you may ask? The government. Do I have any actual weapons, or is this a real threat which could be illegal? No, obviously not. Please don't hurt me. But is it more like a please do something about it? Yes. Or else. Just quickly, so yes, go check out NIAC. Really cool guys. Go and check out ATSL, because this is how the teachers that are teaching you are learning how to teach you, and it's cool to be one step ahead of them. It's like, get mind games, y'all. But also, In My Blood It Runs is this really, really, really cool film that's just come out, which is talking about all of this. It's kind of documenting this young fella from Alice Springs, and it's a story of this young fella. I've forgotten his name now, it's so bad, but yeah, his experience and as a young fella from Alice Springs, so desert mob. So it's not the same as my experience, but it's still really interesting. And NIAC are kind of working in partnership to get that movie all around Australian cinemas. So I don't know if it's had its official like cinematic release date yet, but it will be coming out going out online soon. So please go see it, because I'll know. God, I don't know why I'm so threatening today. I don't mean it. Just a quickie viddy this time. Who knows? Next time I could even have a totally different chair. Tune in next time for that chair-related news. And to all 8 of my subscribers, hang in there. It's thank you for standing by. All 8 of you have really meant a lot to me, and who knows, we could get to 10 one day. And yeah, that's, you guys, you know, make me want to wake up in the morning, so thank you. So yes, follow me on Instagram at Enter the Dragon for not, you know, just some cool stuff. You know, I post occasionally, mostly selfies. And just quickly, I hope everyone's feeling okay in this corona time. I know it's quite scary, and it's good for me because I can make lots of videos, but just think of it like a long haul flight where all you can kind of do is sit down and watch lots of in-flight entertainment and eat lots of food and turn all your phone off and just, you know, just cruise along. Just cruise along, and we'll be landing soon. Anyway, next week I'm going to be doing something on So I thought I just saw something at my window. It was really scary. I just thought of that face in like The Exorcist. I'm terrified of ghosts and stuff. Next week we're going to be doing something on William Cooper. And just to get y'all excited for him, William Cooper was the first person, not even Aboriginal person, first person in the entire world to kind of actively protest against the Nazis regime in Germany, against the Jewish mob. The first person to ever go against, anti-Semitism and Nazism at the time was this Aboriginal fellow from Footscray here in Melbourne, and he's just such a legend. And I know I'm going to start the whole story now, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. But wait for that, because it's going to be very cool. So, bye guys. Love you. Bye.